The thunderclap startled little Emma awake, her tiny fists rubbing sleep from her eyes as the wagon jolted over another rut in the muddy trail. Oregon wasn't supposed to be this way, at least that's what Owen Hayes had promised his family when they'd left Missouri behind 3 months earlier. The promise of fertile land and a fresh start had drawn them westward, but the journey had extracted a terrible price. "Papa," Emma called out, her voice barely audible above the drumming rain on the canvas cover. Beside her, 2-year-old Thomas stirred but didn't wake, his thumb firmly planted in his mouth. "Papa, where's Mama?" Owen's shoulders tensed as he guided the oxen through the downpour, his knuckles white against the reins. How could he tell his 4-year-old daughter that her mother wasn't coming back? That Victoria Hayes, his beautiful, strong-willed Vicky, had succumbed to fever 3 days prior, and now lay buried beneath a simple wooden cross beside the trail, hundreds of miles from the home they'd left behind. "Mama's gone to heaven, sweetheart," he said, the words catching in his throat. Remember what we talked about yesterday, but Emma had already drifted back to sleep, her question forgotten in the rhythmic swaying of the wagon. Owen wiped rain from his face, though he couldn't be certain which droplets were rainwater and which were tears. At 32, he hadn't imagined he'd be a widower with 2 small children, traversing the dangerous Oregon Trail alone. The wagon train had continued without them, unable to delay for one man's grief. The trail boss had given Owen a crude map and directions to the next planned stop, promising they'd wait 3 days if possible. But Owen had already lost a day sitting beside Vicky's grave, unwilling to leave her alone in this wild country. As the afternoon wore on, the storm intensified. The rutted trail transformed into a quagmire of mud and standing water. The oxen struggled forward, their massive shoulders straining against the yoke. "Come on, boys," Owen urged, though his heart wasn't in it. What was the point of Oregon now without Vicky? She had been the one who dreamed of apple orchards and a whitewashed farmhouse. She had sewn the curtains packed away in the trunk, had carefully wrapped her mother's china in quilts, determined to make a proper home no matter how far from civilization they settled. A flash of lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The oxen bellowed in terror, lurching forward. Owen fought for control as the wagon wheels slid sideways toward the edge of the trail, where a steep ravine dropped away into darkness. "Whoa, easy, boys, whoa," he shouted, pulling desperately on the reins. But the frightened animals were beyond reason, their massive bodies pivoting as they tried to flee the storm. Owen felt the moment when control was lost. The right wheels left solid ground, and the wagon tipped precariously. In a split second, he made the only choice a father could. He released the reins and lunged for the back of the wagon where his children slept. The wagon teetered, then plunged sideways down the embankment. Owen's fingers caught the wooden frame as it fell, and he clung desperately, feeling the impact of every rock and tree as they tumbled. A searing pain shot through his leg, then his head struck something hard, and darkness claimed him. When consciousness returned, Owen found himself pinned beneath the overturned wagon, rain pelting his face. Night had fallen, though how much time had passed, he couldn't tell. Panicked, he tried to call out for his children, but only managed a hoarse whisper. "Emma, Thomas." The effort sent spasms of pain through his chest. Broken ribs, most likely. His left leg was definitely broken, trapped beneath the wagon bed at an unnatural angle. Lightning briefly illuminated the scene, the scattered contents of their life strewn across the ravine floor, one ox dead beneath the wagon tongue, the other nowhere to be seen. But no sign of his children. "Emma," he tried again, louder this time despite the pain. "Thomas." A small voice answered from somewhere in the darkness. "Papa, Papa, I'm scared." Emma, relief flooded through him. "Where are you, sweetheart? Where's your brother?" "Tommy's here. We're under the big tree. My arm hurts, Papa." Owen strained to see them but could make out nothing in the darkness between lightning flashes. "Stay where you are, Emma. Papa's leg is hurt. I need you to be brave. Can you do that?" "Yes, Papa." Her voice sounded small and terrified but determined. "Good girl, is Thomas crying?" "No." "He's sleeping again." Owen's mind raced. They were alive, thank God, but for how long? He was trapped, possibly miles from the nearest help, with two small children exposed to the elements. The storm showed no signs of abating, and even if it did, wild animals were a constant threat. Emma, listen carefully. When the sun comes up, I need you to find the trail. Remember how we walked beside the wagon sometimes. You need to go up to the trail and wait there. Someone will come along. I don't want to leave you, Papa. You'll have to take Thomas with you. Find a place where you can be seen from the trail, but stay together. But Papa, Emma, please. This is important. You need to be a big girl now. The conversation exhausted him, and pain dragged him back toward unconsciousness. The last thing he heard was Emma's frightened sobbing. Dawn brought no relief. The rain had stopped, but Owen's situation had worsened. Fever burned through him, and his trapped leg had gone numb, a bad sign. He called for Emma, but received no answer. Had she found her way to the trail with Thomas, or were they lost in the woods? Or worse, had some predator found them in the night hours, passed in a haze of pain and fear? Owen drifted in and out of consciousness, tormented by visions of Vicky's final days, her flushed face, her delirious mumblings, the moment when her hand had gone limp in his. He'd failed her, and now he was failing their children. The sound of a horse's whinny jerked him back to awareness. Someone was coming. Owen tried to shout, but produced only a raspy croak. He heard movement, then a woman's voice, low and melodious with a slight accent he couldn't place. Hello. Is someone down there? Here, Owen managed, louder this time. Under the wagon, footsteps approached, crunching on wet leaves and broken branches. A face appeared in his limited field of vision, a woman with striking amber eyes and dark hair pulled back beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Not a hallucination, then, my children, Owen gasped. Did you find my children? The woman nodded, her expression somber. The little ones are safe. They were by the trail crying for their papa. The girls said you'd had an accident. Relief washed over Owen so powerfully that tears sprang to his eyes. Thank God. Are they hurt? The girl has a broken arm. I've splinted. The boy seems unharmed, just frightened and hungry. I've left them with my horse up on the trail. She studied the wagon. You're badly trapped. I'll need to free that ox and use my horse to pull the wagon off you. Who are you? Owen asked, trying to focus on her face through the haze of pain. Valerie Donovan. I was heading to meet the wagon train at Henderson's Creek when I found your little ones. She stood, assessing the situation. This will hurt, but I need to get you out before dark. More rain's coming. Owen closed his eyes. Do what you must. The next hour was agony as Valerie worked to free the dead ox from the traces, then positioned her horse to pull the wagon. When the weight finally lifted from Owen's crushed leg, the pain nearly made him lose consciousness again. Valerie worked efficiently, cutting away his ruined pant leg to reveal the damage. Owen caught a glimpse of white bone protruding through torn flesh before looking away. It's bad, she said simply, but I've seen worse. I was a nurse during the war. Confederate or Union? Owen asked through gritted teeth as she cleaned the wound. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I treated both. Pain doesn't discriminate, nor did I. She glanced up at the darkening sky. We need shelter. There's a trapper's cabin about 2 miles east I passed yesterday. Think you can ride if I help you up? For my children, I can do anything, Owen said, though he wasn't at all certain he could remain conscious through the journey. Valerie helped him to his feet, or rather, his one good foot, and somehow got him onto her horse. She gathered what supplies she could salvage from the wreckage, then led the horse back up to the trail where Emma and Thomas waited. Emma launched herself at her father's good leg, sobbing. Papa. I did what you said. I took Tommy to the trail. You were so brave, sweetheart, Owen said, fighting to stay upright in the saddle. This is Miss Donovan. She's going to help us. Thomas, too young to understand what had happened, simply reached up with chubby arms. Up, Papa. Valerie lifted the boy and settled him in front of Owen on the saddle. Hold tight to your papa, she instructed, then took Emma's good hand. The cabin isn't far, but we need to hurry before the storm returns. The journey was a blur of pain for Owen. He focused solely on keeping Thomas secure against his chest, trusting Valerie to lead them to safety. When the small log cabin finally came into view, he nearly wept with relief. The cabin was crude but solid, with a stone fireplace and a single room containing a rough-hewn table, a chair, and a narrow bed. Valerie helped Owen onto the bed while she built a fire and settled the children. "You're good with them," Owen observed as she coaxed a smile from Thomas with a simple game of peek-a-boo. Valerie's expression remained neutral. "I had younger siblings." The past tense wasn't lost on Owen, but he didn't press. Everyone on the frontier carried losses. As night fell, Valerie splinted Owen's leg properly and treated his other injuries. Her hands were gentle but confident. "The break is clean," she explained. "With proper rest, it should heal well, though you'll likely always have a limp." "Where did you learn medicine?" Owen asked, grateful for the distraction from the pain. "My father was a doctor in Virginia. I assisted him from the time I could hold instruments." She hesitated. "Then the war came, and I learned more than any woman should about wounds and dying men." Owen studied her in the firelight. Valerie Donovan was perhaps 30, with a face that spoke of hardship endured rather than conventional beauty. Yet there was something compelling about her, a quiet strength in her movements, a kindness in her eyes when she looked at his children. "Why are you traveling alone?" he asked. She poured him a cup of willow bark tea for the pain. "I'm meeting my brother in Oregon City. He went ahead last year to establish a medical practice." A shadow crossed her face. "I had reasons to delay my departure." Owen didn't press further. Everyone had secrets, especially those heading west to start anew. His own past wasn't without complications: debts in Missouri, a failed business, a brother-in-law who'd threatened to kill him over a disputed inheritance. The frontier offered second chances to those brave enough to seize them. "My wife died 3 days ago," Owen said suddenly, needing to speak the terrible truth aloud. "Fever took her. I buried her beside the trail and kept going because, what else could I do?" Valerie's hand paused in stirring the stew she'd prepared. "I'm sorry," she said simply, but with such genuine compassion that Owen felt tears threatening again. "I don't know how to do this without her," he admitted. "How to raise them alone. One day at a time," Valerie said. "That's all any of us can do." They ate a simple meal, and Valerie made pallets near the fire for the children. Emma fell asleep quickly, exhausted from her ordeal, but Thomas was fussy. "He misses his mother," Owen explained, wincing as he tried to shift positions. Vicky would sing to him. Without comment, Valerie lifted Thomas and began a soft lullaby. Her voice was untrained but sweet, and the child's eyes grew heavy as she rocked him gently. Owen watched, feeling a complicated mixture of grief for what he'd lost and gratitude for this unexpected help. "You should rest," Valerie said after Thomas finally slept. "Your body needs to heal." "What about you?" "I'll keep watch." She settled into the chair by the fire, a small pistol visible in her lap. "The cabin isn't mine to use, and wild animals aren't the only danger in these parts." Owen wanted to protest, to insist she take the bed, but exhaustion claimed him before he could form the words. He dreamt of Vicky that night, not the Vicky of her final days, but the vibrant woman who had charmed him at a church social 9 years earlier, her laugh carrying across the room. In the dream, she kissed him goodbye. "Take care of our babies," she whispered, "and Owen, it's all right to be happy again." He woke with tears on his face to find Valerie changing the dressing on his leg. Dawn light filtered through the cabin's single window, and the children still slept peacefully. "You talked in your sleep," she said quietly. "You called for her." Owen looked away, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. Don't be. Grief isn't something to apologize for." She finished wrapping his leg. "The wound looks clean, no infection so far. How long until I can travel?" Owen asked, already dreading the answer. "A break like this, 6 weeks minimum before you should put weight on it." She met his eyes directly. "I know that's not what you wanted to hear." Owen stared at the rough-hewn ceiling. 6 weeks. The wagon train would be long gone, his opportunity to claim land under the Donation Land Claim Act potentially lost. Winter would be approaching by the time they reached Oregon, if they reached it at all. "What choice do I have?" he said finally. "We can't stay in this trapper's cabin indefinitely." Valerie stood, wiping her hands on her apron. "There's a settlement about 15 miles east Ferguson's Crossing. Small, but they have a doctor of sorts. I can take the children there today, send help back for you." The thought of being separated from Emma and Thomas, even briefly, sent panic through Owen. "No, we stay together." Then we need to fashion a travois for the horse. It won't be comfortable, but we could reach Ferguson's Crossing by tomorrow evening. Owen nodded, relieved. I have money. I can pay for lodging for your trouble. Something like hurt flashed in Valerie's eyes. I didn't help you for money, Mr. Hayes. Owen, he corrected. And I didn't mean to offend, I don't want to be a burden. Emma stirred then, saving them from the awkward moment. Papa, I'm hungry. The morning passed in preparations. Valerie constructed a travois using salvaged wood from the wagon and canvas from Owen's supplies. She was resourceful and practical, showing Emma how to make a simple doll from corn husks while Thomas napped and Owen watched helplessly from the bed. You're good with children, he observed again as Emma proudly showed him her creation. Valerie's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I always wanted my own. Life had other plans. By midday, they were ready to depart. The journey would be arduous for Owen, lying on the travois, but the alternative was remaining alone in the cabin while Valerie took the children ahead, an option he couldn't bear to consider. The first few miles were even more painful than Owen had anticipated. Every jolt and bump sent daggers of pain through his broken leg and cracked ribs. He bit his lip until it bled, determined not to frighten the children with his cries. Valerie noticed, of course. She stopped frequently, offering him water and laudanum she'd found among the trapper's supplies. Take it, she urged when he hesitated. The children need you coherent when we reach town, not half dead from pain. Night found them only halfway to Ferguson's Crossing. Valerie made camp in a sheltered grove, building a small fire and creating a lean-to from branches and the remaining canvas. She settled the children close to Owen, where he could comfort them despite his immobility. As the children slept, Valerie sat beside the fire, her face pensive in the golden light. You're risking a lot to help us, Owen said quietly. Your brother must be worried. You said you were supposed to meet the wagon train. Daniel will understand, he always does. She poked at the fire with a stick. Family is everything to him, he'll approve of my helping yours. Even at the cost of your own plans, she shrugged. Plans change. Life teaches you that lesson repeatedly until you learn it. What was your plan? Owen asked, curious about this enigmatic woman who had appeared like an angel of mercy when they needed her most. Valerie was silent so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she spoke, her voice low. After the war, there wasn't much left for me in Virginia. My parents died in a typhoid outbreak. Our home was requisitioned and never returned. Daniel went west first, wrote to me about the opportunities for a female nurse or midwife in the Oregon Territory. But you delayed, Owen prompted gently. She met his eyes, something vulnerable in her gaze. I was engaged, Clarence Whitfield, a banker's son who fought for the Confederacy and returned. Changed, I kept hoping he'd become the man I remembered, but... She touched her cheek unconsciously, and Owen suddenly understood. He hurt you. The last time, yes, badly enough that his own mother helped me escape. Her laugh held no humor. Strange, isn't it? I treated hundreds of wounded men during the war without flinching, but I couldn't save the man I thought I loved from his own demons. That wasn't your responsibility, Owen said firmly. Perhaps not, but failure feels the same regardless. She looked up at the stars. Daniel doesn't know why I finally agreed to join him. I couldn't bear for him to know how foolish I'd been. There's nothing foolish about hoping someone can change, Owen said. Only in staying when they prove they won't. Valerie studied him thoughtfully. You're not what I expected, Owen Hayes. What did you expect? Most men I've known would say I got what I deserved for not being an obedient fiancé. Owen's expression hardened. Any man who raises his hand to a woman deserves a bullet, not a bride. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of shared values in a world where such things couldn't be taken for granted. They talked late into the night, sharing stories of their lives before the trail west had brought them together. Owen learned that Valerie had been born to privilege in Richmond. Her father, a respected physician, whose practice had served the city's elite. The war had stripped away that protected existence, thrusting her into field hospitals, where she'd learned to amputate limbs and close, gaping wounds, while artillery fire shook the ground beneath her feet. In turn, he told her about growing up on a small farm in Kentucky, moving to Missouri after his parents died, meeting Victoria at church and falling headlong into a love that had defined his adult life. "She sounds remarkable," Valerie said when he described Vicky's determination to create a new life in Oregon. She was. Owen felt the familiar ache of loss, but somehow speaking of Vicky to Valerie didn't deepen his pain as he'd feared. Instead, it felt like honoring her memory. "She would have liked you. She always said she wished she'd had your kind of education." "And I always wished for her kind of certainty," Valerie replied, "to know so clearly what I wanted from life." They reached Ferguson's Crossing late the following day. The settlement was little more than a cluster of buildings around a trading post, but to Owen, it looked like salvation. The local doctor, a gruff older man named Wilson, confirmed Valerie's assessment of Owen's injuries and offered them rooms above the general store while Owen healed. 6 weeks minimum, Dr. Wilson pronounced, echoing Valerie's earlier diagnosis. "That leg needs proper time to knit or you'll never walk right again." The prospect of such a long delay should have dismayed Owen, but strangely, he felt only relief. The children were safe. They had shelter. And Valerie, to his surprise, announced she would stay until he could travel safely. "But your brother," Owen protested. "I've sent word with a supply wagon heading to Oregon City," she explained. "Daniel will understand. I can't leave you and the children until you're able to manage." Owen wanted to argue, to insist he wouldn't be responsible for further disrupting her plans, but selfishly, he was grateful. The thought of Valerie leaving filled him with an unexpected dread. Life in Ferguson's Crossing settled into a routine. Valerie found work assisting Dr. Wilson, whose arthritic hands welcomed her skilled help. Owen, confined to his rooms initially, focused on regaining his strength and caring for the children when they weren't being doted on by the settlement's women, who were enchanted by Thomas's dimpled smile and Emma's serious demeanor. As weeks passed, Owen began to venture out on crutches, joining other men at the trading post where news and gossip were exchanged. The wagon train he'd been part of had reached Oregon safely, he learned, though 2 more lives had been lost to river crossings. He sent letters with a military courier, informing the authorities of his intention to still claim land under the Donation Land Claim Act, citing his injuries as reason for delay. Each evening, Valerie would return from the doctor's office, tired but fulfilled, and share dinner with Owen and the children in their rooms. These simple meals became the highlight of Owen's days. Emma blossomed under Valerie's gentle attention, following her Miss Val like a shadow whenever possible. Even Thomas, who had been clingy and difficult after losing his mother, began to reach for Valerie with easy affection. Owen watched their growing attachment with complicated emotions. Gratitude, certainly. Relief that his children were healing from their loss, but also a nagging worry about what would happen when they continued their separate journeys. One evening, after the children were asleep, Owen found Valerie on the small balcony outside their rooms, gazing at the stars. "You've become important to them," he said quietly, balancing on his crutches. She didn't turn. "Children are resilient, they'll adjust when I leave. And if I asked you not to leave," the words escaped before Owen could consider their implications. Now she did turn, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "What are you asking, Owen?" He hesitated, suddenly uncertain. Was it too soon? Would she think him disrespectful to Vicky's memory? But something had grown between them over these weeks, something neither had anticipated, but which felt increasingly precious. "I'm asking if you would consider continuing to Oregon with us," he said carefully. "Not as our nurse or savior, but as my partner, perhaps in time as more." Valerie's eyes widened. "Owen, you're still grieving. You don't know what you're saying." "I'm grieving, yes. I'll always miss Vicky, but I know my own mind." He moved closer, setting aside one crutch to take her hand. "You told me once that life teaches you plans change until you learn the lesson. Maybe this is what we're meant to learn, that sometimes the path we didn't choose is the one that leads us home." Tears glistened in her eyes. "The children need stability. I can't have you offering this out of gratitude or convenience, only to regret it later." "Gratitude and convenience wouldn't make my heart race when you enter a room," Owen said softly. "They wouldn't make me lie awake wondering what your life has been like, what made you who you are." They wouldn't make me imagine a future where you're by my side, helping to raise my children, perhaps having more of our own someday. A tear slipped down her cheek. I can't replace her. I would never ask you to. He squeezed her hand. You're not Vicky. You're Valerie, brave, brilliant Valerie who saved my children and then somehow began to save me too. She looked down at their joined hands. I need time, Owen. This is unexpected. We have 4 more weeks before the doctor says I can travel, he reminded her. Time is the one thing we do have. That night marked a turning point. Though Valerie didn't give Owen an answer, something shifted in their interactions. A new awareness, a cautious exploration of possibilities. She began teaching Emma to read, using Dr. Wilson's medical texts as primers. Owen started carving toys for Thomas, his hands remembering skills long unused. They took short walks together as Owen's strength returned, Valerie pointing out medicinal plants and explaining their uses. Owen found himself captivated by her knowledge, her quick mind, her unexpected humor that emerged as she grew more comfortable in their companionship. 3 weeks into their stay, a letter arrived from Daniel Donovan, carried by a fur trader heading east. Owen watched anxiously as Valerie read it, fearing it might contain a demand for her immediate departure. Daniel sends his regards, she said when she finished, a small smile playing at her lips. He says any man fortunate enough to have earned my devotion must be worth knowing, and he looks forward to meeting you in Oregon City. Relief flooded through Owen. You told him about us. I told him I'd found a family in need and chosen to help. Her eyes met his. I may have mentioned that the father was a man of exceptional character who was causing me to reconsider certain decisions. Owen grinned. Exceptional character, is it? Don't let it go to your head, she teased, but her eyes were soft with affection. That evening, after the children were asleep, Owen found the courage to kiss her for the first time, a gentle, questioning press of lips that Valerie returned with surprising certainty. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his. I never expected this, she whispered. To find someone like you in the wilderness. Nor I you, Owen admitted, but I'm beginning to think the best parts of life are the ones we don't plan for. The final weeks in Ferguson's Crossing passed too quickly. Doctor. Wilson pronounced Owen's leg healed enough for travel, though he warned it would never be as strong as before. The townsfolk, who had embraced the small family, helped outfit them for the remaining journey to Oregon City, a wedding gift, they called it, though Owen and Valerie hadn't formally announced any intentions. The night before their departure, Owen found Valerie packing medical supplies, her movements efficient but tense. Having second thoughts, he asked, the fear that had been building in him finally finding voice. She looked up, startled. About leaving? No. The settlement has been kind, but it's not where we belong. We, Owen repeated, relief washing through him. Then you've decided, Valerie set aside the bandages she'd been rolling. I decided weeks ago, Owen. I was simply waiting for you to be certain. I've been certain since that night on the balcony, he assured her. Probably before, if I'm honest with myself. She crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. Then yes, I will continue to Oregon with you as your partner, your wife if you'll have me, and a mother to your children if they'll accept me as such. Owen pulled her close, overwhelmed by gratitude and a happiness he hadn't dared hope for after Vicky's death. They already love you, as do I. The journey to Oregon City took nearly 3 weeks. They traveled with a small merchant caravan for safety, Owen driving a wagon purchased with the last of his savings, Valerie riding beside him with Thomas on her lap, while Emma chattered excitedly about their new home. The trail was not without challenges, river crossings that required careful navigation, a tense encounter with a group of hunters that Valerie diffused with calm diplomacy. Nights when Thomas cried for his mother and could only be soothed by Owen's deep voice singing the lullabies Vicky had taught him. Through it all, Owen watched Valerie's steady presence, her practical skills, her growing bond with his children, and marveled at the twists of fate that had brought them together. What if the wagon hadn't overturned? What if Emma hadn't found her way to the trail with Thomas? What if Valerie had passed by without stopping? You're thinking too hard, Valerie observed one evening as they sat by the campfire, the children already asleep in the wagon. I can practically hear the wheels turning. Owen smiled, taking her hand. Just counting blessings I never expected. As am I, she squeezed his fingers. Though I admit I'm nervous about meeting your brother-in-law in Oregon City. You said he threatened you. Harvey threatened a lot of things when he was drinking, Owen explained. But he left Missouri before we did. I doubt he even knows where we settled. Valerie nodded, but Owen noticed she checked her small pistol more frequently in the days that followed. Her protective instincts toward his family touched him deeply. Oregon City appeared on the horizon on a crisp October morning, its cluster of buildings nestled along the Willamette River promising civilization after months on the trail. Emma stood on the wagon seat, pointing excitedly. "Is that our new home, Papa?" "Just the beginning of it," Owen told her. "We'll meet Uncle Daniel there, then find our own land to build on." Daniel Donovan was waiting at the edge of town, having received word of their approach from scouts. He was a tall man with Valerie's amber eyes and an easy smile that immediately put Owen at ease. "So this is the family that stole my sister from me," Daniel said after embracing Valerie. His tone was warm, his eyes approving as he surveyed Owen and the children. "Not stole," Owen corrected, extending his hand. "Merely borrowed until we could deliver her safely to you." Daniel laughed, clasping Owen's hand firmly. "Well said, sir. Though from her letters I suspect the arrangement may become permanent," Valerie blushed, a sight Owen found endlessly endearing. "We haven't formalized anything yet." "Time enough for that," Daniel assured them. "For now, you'll stay with me. I have a house far too large for one person, with a proper surgery attached. The town's growing rapidly. We've had 3 wagon trains arrive since August." As they followed Daniel through Oregon City's muddy streets, Owen was struck by the bustling energy of the place. New buildings were under construction everywhere, the sound of hammers and saws creating a symphony of progress. This was a place of beginnings, of futures being built plank by plank. Daniel's home was indeed spacious, a 2-story structure near the center of town, with clean, simple furnishings, and an attached office where he saw patients. He showed them to adjoining rooms upstairs, his consideration evident in the small touches: a carved wooden horse for Thomas, a book of illustrated poems for Emma, fresh wildflowers in a jar for Valerie. "You're welcome to stay as long as needed," Daniel told Owen as they settled in. "Though I suspect you'll be eager to claim your land before winter sets in." "I've delayed long enough," Owen agreed. "I should visit the land office tomorrow." That evening, after a meal that reminded them all how much they'd missed proper cooking, Daniel entertained the children with stories while Owen and Valerie walked in the small garden behind the house. "It feels strange," Valerie admitted, "to be in a town again after so long on the trail. To sleep in a proper bed, to not be constantly watching for danger." "Good strange or bad strange?" Owen asked, studying her profile in the fading light. "Just strange." She turned to him, her expression serious. "Owen, before we take any further steps, there's something I need to tell you." "Something I've kept from you." Alarm flickered through him. "What is it?" She took a deep breath. "Clarence, my former fiancé, he didn't just hurt me. The night I fled Virginia, he came to our home drunk, demanding I marry him immediately. When I refused, he became violent. There was a struggle. He fell and struck his head on the hearth. Understanding dawned. He died." She nodded, eyes downcast. "It was self-defense, but his family is powerful. They would have seen me hanged. His mother helped me escape, gave me money for passage west." As far as anyone knows, Clarence Whitfield disappeared after a night of heavy drinking. Owen processed this revelation. "Is that why you were traveling alone? Why you delayed joining Daniel?" "I spent months hiding in different towns, always afraid Clarence's father would send men after me." Her voice trembled slightly. "I needed to be sure I wasn't followed before I led them to my brother." Owen took her hands, waiting until she met his eyes. "Valerie, you did what was necessary to survive. That doesn't change how I feel about you. If anything, it makes me more certain that you're exactly the kind of woman I want by my side, one who faces life's hardest moments with courage." Relief washed over her face. "You don't think less of me. I think more of you," he assured her. "And I promise you this: no one will harm you or the children while I draw breath. Not Clarence's family, not my brother-in-law, not anyone. She stepped into his embrace, and they stood together in the gathering darkness, two survivors who had found unexpected hope in each other. The next morning, Owen visited the land office while Valerie and the children explored Oregon City with Daniel. The news was better than he dared hope despite his delay. There was still prime farmland available along the Willamette River, not far from town. With the documentation he'd carried from Missouri and testimony from members of his original wagon train who had settled nearby, Owen was able to secure a claim to 160 acres. "It's beautiful land," the clerk told him, marking the boundaries on a crude map. "Good water access, fertile soil. Previous claimant died of measles before completing his cabin, but the foundation's there. You could have shelter before the first snow if you work quickly." Owen left the office with the precious claim certificate, his heart lighter than it had been in months. He had land, he had his children, and he had Valerie if she would indeed agree to build a life with him. He found them at Daniel's house, where Emma was proudly showing off her new ability to write her name, a skill Valerie had been patiently teaching her. "We have land," Owen announced, unable to contain his excitement. 160 acres along the river with a cabin foundation already laid. Daniel clapped him on the shoulder. "Excellent news, we should celebrate." That evening, they did indeed celebrate. Daniel invited neighbors and patients, introducing Owen and Valerie to people who would become their community. The gathering was simple but joyful music from a fiddle home-brewed cider, children playing tag in the yard as adults discussed crops and weather, and the latest news from the East. As the party wound down, Owen found himself beside Reverend Thomas Parker, Oregon City's only minister. "Daniel tells me you're considering settling permanently," the Reverend said, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Both in Oregon and in matrimony." Owen nodded, watching Valerie across the room where she sat with Emma on her lap, listening intently to something the child was telling her. "If she'll have me." "Love after loss is a precious gift," Reverend Parker said quietly, "one not everyone is fortunate enough to find. I know." Owen's throat tightened with emotion. "I never expected to feel this way again." "Then don't waste time, young man," the Reverend smiled. "Life on the frontier is uncertain. Claim your happiness while you can." That night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Owen found Valerie on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. "I saw you talking with the Reverend," she said as he joined her. "He seems a good man." "He is." Owen took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "He also mentioned he'd be happy to perform a wedding ceremony whenever we're ready." Valerie turned to face him fully. "And when might that be?" Instead of answering, Owen lowered himself carefully to one knee, wincing slightly as his healing leg protested. "Valerie Donovan, you found my children when they were lost, saved my life when I was broken, and somehow restored hope I thought was buried with Victoria. Will you marry me, build a home with me, raise these children and perhaps others with me, for as long as we both shall live?" Tears glistened in her eyes. "You're certain this isn't too soon?" "The only thing I'm certain of is that I love you," Owen said simply. "Everything else, the land, the cabin we'll build, the life we'll make, those are just details. You are what matters." "Then yes," she whispered, pulling him to his feet and into her arms. "Yes, I will marry you, Owen Hayes." They were married 3 days later in Daniel's garden, with Emma serving as flower girl, proudly scattering petals from her uninjured arm, and Thomas watching solemnly from his uncle's arms. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, Reverend Parker speaking of new beginnings and God's providence in bringing them together. "You may kiss your bride," the Reverend said finally, and Owen did, pouring into that kiss all the gratitude and love and promise he felt. The following week, they moved to their land. The cabin foundation was indeed sound, and with help from neighbors and Daniel, they quickly raised walls and a roof. It wasn't the whitewashed farmhouse Vicky had dreamed of, but as Owen watched Valerie hang curtains she had sewn from fabric purchased in Oregon City, he knew it was exactly the home they needed. Winter came early that year, snow blanketing their new homestead by mid-November. They spent long evenings by the fireplace, Valerie teaching Emma to read and sew, Owen carving toys for Thomas and planning spring plantings. On clear days, they explored their land together, identifying spots for an orchard, a vegetable garden, perhaps even a small surgery where Valerie could treat neighbors as she'd begun to do informally. Christmas brought their first true test as a family. Owen woke that morning to find Emma standing beside the bed, tears streaming down her face. "I miss Mama," she whispered, clutching the cornhusk doll Valerie had made her months earlier. "Does that make Miss Mother sad?" Owen gathered his daughter into his arms, meeting Valerie's understanding gaze over Emma's head. "No, sweetheart. Mother understands that we can love her very much while still missing Mama, just like I do." Valerie sat up, opening her arms to include Emma in an embrace. "Your Mama will always be part of you, Emma, part of all of us. I would never want you to forget her." Emma studied Valerie's face carefully. "Promise? Promise." Valerie kissed the top of the child's head. "Now, shall we see what Father Christmas might have brought for good little girls who are learning to read so beautifully?" The simple gifts they exchanged that day: knitted mittens and scarves, wooden toys, books Daniel had sent from town, were made precious by the love that accompanied them. As Owen watched his new wife and children by the fire that evening, he felt a contentment he hadn't dared hope for after Vicky's death. Spring brought new life to their homestead. Valerie planted the vegetable garden she'd planned all winter, with Emma as her eager assistant. Owen and neighbors raised a barn, the first step toward the cattle and horses he hoped to acquire. Thomas, now approaching 3, followed his father everywhere, helping with chores and chattering constantly. In late April, as the apple trees they'd planted burst into bloom, Valerie shared news that completed their joy: she was expecting a child, due in the autumn. "Are you happy?" she asked Owen as they stood among the blossoming trees, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Beyond words," he assured her, drawing her close. "This child will be so loved." "As are we all," Valerie murmured against his chest. Owen thought of the journey that had brought them to this moment: the grief and loss, the chance meeting on a muddy trail, the slow building of trust and love amid healing. None of it had been in his plans when he'd left Missouri with Victoria and their children, yet he couldn't imagine any other path now. As summer turned to fall, their homestead flourished. The cabin gained a second room. The vegetable garden yielded a bountiful harvest. Valerie's reputation as a healer grew, bringing a steady stream of neighbors seeking her knowledge of medicines and childbirth. On a golden October afternoon, as leaves drifted from the trees they'd planted, Valerie gave birth to a daughter, Rose Olivia Hayes, named for both their mothers. Owen held his newborn daughter with wonder, marveling at the perfect blending of himself and Valerie in her tiny features. Emma and Thomas crowded around, awestruck by their new sister. Emma, now 5 and reading quite well, promised to teach Rose everything she knew. Thomas, less certain about this small, noisy addition, nevertheless patted the baby's head with solemn care. That evening, with the children finally asleep and Rose nursing contentedly at Valerie's breast, Owen sat beside his wife on their bed, overwhelmed by the fullness of his heart. "Do you ever wonder," he asked softly, "what might have happened if you hadn't found Emma and Thomas that day? If you'd continued on to meet your wagon train?" Valerie considered this, her finger tracing Rose's delicate cheek. "Sometimes. But then I look at our life here, at you, at the children, at everything we've built together, and I know this is exactly where I'm meant to be." Owen kissed her temple, breathing in the scent of her hair, the new baby sweetness of Rose, the wood smoke from their hearth. "When I lost Vicky, I thought my heart had been buried with her. I couldn't imagine loving again, couldn't see a future beyond grief. And now," Valerie asked, leaning into his embrace, "now I understand that love isn't finite. It grows to encompass what we need, who we need." He smiled as Rose's tiny hand wrapped around his finger. "Vicky will always be part of me, part of Emma and Thomas. But you, Valerie Hayes, have given us all a new heart to live from." Outside their window, the first star appeared in the darkening sky. Inside, in the warm glow of lantern light, a family born of chance and choice and courage faced the future together, their love a beacon in the wilderness of the Oregon Territory. In the years that followed, the Hayes homestead became known throughout the region for its hospitality and Valerie's healing skills. Their family grew. Rose was joined by a brother, Daniel Owen, 2 years later, and eventually by another sister, Hope Elizabeth. Emma became a teacher in the settlement's first school, while Thomas discovered a talent for working with horses that made their farm a center for breeding and training. Owen's leg, never fully healed, he walked with a cane in later years, but he built the orchard Vicky had dreamed of, shipping apples as far as San Francisco by the time the children were grown. And every year, on the anniversary of the day Valerie had found 2 crying children by a muddy trail, they told the story of how their family had been forged from tragedy and saved by the courage of a woman traveling alone, who had found her own heart's home in the process. Some would call it chance, Owen would say, holding Valerie's hand as they sat on their porch watching grandchildren play in the orchard. But I call it providence. Valerie would smile, the years having softened but never diminished her beauty in his eyes. Whatever its name, she would reply, I'm grateful for it every day. And in this way, on land claimed by courage and cultivated with love, they lived out the promise of that long ago meeting 2 broken hearts made whole in the joining, creating a legacy of love that would endure long after the Oregon Trail was just a memory in the history of the West.